To understand Neorealism, we need to first go back to realism. Realism focuses on the anarchic nature of the states. According to realism, the human nature is evil, and since the states are made up of individuals, humans, hence the nature of states is also anarchic. States pursue their self security themselves, they do not depend on anyone else, and every state tries to maximize its power. And that is the core of the realism, that states focus on improving their power that helps in their security. But Neorealism shifts the focus from the states to the structure of the system. Neo-realism, or it is also called structural realism, focuses on the structure of the system. It insists that the structure itself is anarchic, and that's why states have to be anarchic. Realism believes that states are hungry for power and glory. But Neorealism does not say this. Neorealism says that states have to maintain their security in an anarchic environment of the system. The theory of Neorealism came up in the time of Cold War. During the Cold War, there were two blocs. One was Western Bloc led by United States, and the other bloc was the Communist Bloc led by the Soviet Russia. So, in that time, the structure of the system was bipolar. And the neo-realists say that the bipolar system is the safest and most stable system, and their focus is on the status quo. Now, neo-realism is divided into two parts. There are actually more than two, but two are the prominent ones. One is defensive realism, that was proposed by Kenneth Waltz, and another one is offensive realism, that is the theory of John Mearsheimer. The defensive neo-realism says that the states have to be worried about their security, and hence they try to, as a defensive measure, they increase their military might. And the offensive neo-realism, that is the theory of John Mearsheimer, this offensive neo-realism says that the states want to maximize their power, and only by maximizing their power and trying to be expansionists, states can have their security. Theory of neo-realism came in the times of Cold War, and the Cold War remained a Cold War because there was strategic deterrence. Both the big powers had this in mind, that if they destroy the other, they would not be safe. This is called mutually assured destruction, and we know that at the peak of the Cold War, the United States had around 30,000 warheads, and Soviet Union had 40,000 warheads. And this mutually assured destruction did not let them destroy the other one, and hence the status quo was maintained. So the defensive realism, especially in the neo-realism, focuses on maintaining the status quo. So the theory of neo-realism says that the structure of the system is anarchic, and hence states have to be worried about their security, and they do take certain measures to make their security good. And since every state wants to maximize its power for its security purposes, the other states do not know the power, and especially other states do not know the intentions of other states. So a security dilemma starts, and every state does not trust others. So every state have to be prepared and well organized with respect to their military power. Now some differences between the classical realism and neo-realism. The classical realism, that is old realism, that says that the states themselves are anarchic, just like they say that the human nature is anarchic and they deceive others. So the focus of realists is the same, that the nature of states is anarchic, whereas the structural realism or neo-realism insists that it is not the nature of the states that is anarchic, but it is the system of the world that is anarchic, and hence states are compelled to be anarchic for their security. And another difference between the classical realism and neo-realism is this, that the classical realism took only the states as the actors in the system. They considered the states as the primary actors and the only actors in the system. Whereas the neo-realism says that even though the states are the very important actors, but they are not the only actors in the world. In other words, neo-realism considers the presence of non-state actors, especially that the neo-realism considers United Nations organization as a very important international organization. We talked about the Cold War, and during that there were two poles in the world, one led by United States and another by the communist Russia, communist Soviet Union. So what happened that the West had a common enemy in the form of Soviet Union, but when Cold War ended, we saw that the Western Bloc itself got somehow disintegrated, because there was no common foe against them. In the start of Iraq war, some of the states in Europe, Germany and France, opposed this Iraq war, and even the neo-realists like John Mearsheimer, they opposed Iraq war. So neo-realism does not always say that every state have to be increasing their military might and engaging in war. This is not true. Neo-realists have many times opposed wars, and they, especially John Mearsheimer, he who introduced the concept of offensive realism, he is very much against the liberal hegemony of United States. So neo-realism says that though the system is anarchic and states have to be proactive, but it does not supports war very much. Now there have been some criticisms on neo-realism, like domestic policies are not given value in neo-realism, because neo-realists focus only on the structure of the system, and realism also does not value domestic politics, but the reason of not valuing domestic politics is different with respect to neo-realism and realism. Neo-realism does not value domestic politics because it considers the structure of the system to be important and not the internal politics of the state. Whereas the classical realism, it does not value internal politics, because it considers that it considers that the national interest of the states is important, and that must be valued and not the internal politics. So to conclude, neo-realism is also called structural realism because the focus of Neo-Realism is on the structure of the system, and that is anarchic. Because the structure of the system is anarchic, states have to defensively or offensively focus on their security.